What's going on, y'all? It's Cone back here again today with another video, and today I want to talk for a little bit about the Houston Rockets, who are one of my most anticipated teams for this upcoming season. Now, last year was a big shift for the Rockets because they had years of being one of the worst teams in the Western Conference, not really making any progression, and they decided that they were done with that. So they went out there and made some free agent signings. They added specifically Fred VanVleet and Dylan Brooks, spending a lot of money to add those two guys, and I'll be the first to admit, wasn't the biggest fan of those signings. I felt like it was overpaid and that it really wouldn't do that much for them, but ultimately those veterans were important for the progression that they made last season, going 500, a big time growth season from what we saw the previous few years. It also didn't hurt that they had Ime Udoka in as the head coach, replacing Stephen Silas, who a lot of people considered one of the worst head coaches in the league when he was done with Houston. And Udoka had amazing success with Boston in 2022. They went to the finals, had an amazing defense, and then there was the incident that caused him to be fired, goes over to Houston, and once again implements a lot of that. They were a top 10 defensive team. Offense was pretty shaky, and they were kind of on the cusp of the play-in for a majority of the year. Specifically at the end of the season, despite Alperen Sengun going down, the Rockets really found a stride, specifically behind insane play from Jalen Green. They got really close. They were at one point just a game back of the Warriors. They may have passed them for like a slight moment, but in the end it wasn't enough. They started to lose some games. The Warriors figured it out, and they finished 41-41, 5 games out of a play-in spot. But hey, again, massive growth from where we saw them the previous few years leading up to the 2024 season. And of course, that's all great, but for Houston, a franchise that has a long-time history of being highly competitive, that's where they want to get back to. This season, they have a goal, I'm sure, of not just being a play-in team, but being a playoff squad. A lot of Rockets fans have high expectations. Seen a bunch of people say maybe they could win 50 games or at least get somewhere close to that. They could be this year's jump team like in Oklahoma City from last season, or the Memphis Grizzlies from a few years prior, like the Orlando Magic from last year in the Eastern Conference. And I don't know if they're going to get quite up to 50 wins, but I do anticipate that this is going to be a really solid Rockets team this season. I mean, they were solid last year, just a straight up good team this upcoming season. And this is the building block year to what eventually, I think within the next couple of seasons, will be a juggernaut in the Western Conference, because they have such a great foundation, such insane young talent, and they've got all the assets to make the big splash that I think is coming soon for this franchise. But first, let's talk about the guys on the roster right now, the pieces of the young core that is so exciting and full of potential. And it all begins with who I imagine most of you would agree with me is the best player on the roster in Alperen Sengun. Their starting center, he is not this big-time rim protector. He's much more of a playmaking, scoring big, got a variety of post moves, is able to score over anybody, even if your name is Victor Wembanyama. And he had a great season last year. He was cut a bit short by an injury that shouldn't hinder him going into this year, but when he was on the court, fantastic season for the young big. 21.1 points per game, 9.3 boards, 5 assists, 1.2 steals, and shot right around 54% from the field. He's not a big-time three-point shooter. That is something I would like to see come along, but he has great touch. He showed an ability to knock down some middies last season, specifically this one-leg shot he likes to go to a ton, and I feel like eventually that will translate. I don't know if he'll ever be a knockdown volume three-point shooting big, but I think over time Sengun will get better in that regard, and the fact that he's already able to put up over 20 points per game, play make the way that he does, and just has such a great feel at a young age is a great indicator that he's going to be really good for a long time. I'll be honest, I don't know if he's going to be the guy that leads him to a championship someday, but Sengun feels like a really solid part of whatever they build, whether he ends up as the second best player, third best, fourth best, wherever he lands. Sengun is one of those players that feels like he can really contribute to winning in a variety of ways, and for right now, a team that desperately needs offense, Sengun is one of those guys that generates it out of thin air. He's such an unorthodox and fun player to watch. Alongside him, you have a guy like Jalen Green, who is someone who has maybe the most potential, or at least is in that conversation, out of anybody on the roster. And the big reason why, like I mentioned earlier, the Rockets nearly made the play-in push last season was the great play of Jalen Green down the stretch. And it was really a tale of two seasons for Jalen Green, because for the first like 60 or so games, he was really bad. And there were conversations about if the Rockets should move off of him, reports that they offered him for Mikal Bridges to the Brooklyn Nets at the trade deadline, or at least discussed it. And then after the deadline passes, Jalen Green turns it up over the last 20 games that he played, 24.1 points per game, 6.2 rebounds, 4.3 assists, shot 46% from the field, almost 38% from deep. And a lot of that was without Sengun out there on the floor, a guy that takes pressure off him, that can set him up for shots, that can set screens. He was really able to unlock his game. And there are some people that think his progression was because Sengun got hurt. I don't believe that. I think it was a bit of a coincidence. Maybe he was able to play a little bit more freely, but I do think having Sengun and Jalen Green out there together will be beneficial for this squad. I don't think it's a one or the other type scenario, and I'm hopeful that Jalen Green carries some of that over to this upcoming season, because if he does, that's what really takes the Rockets to the next level. If you want to talk about them winning 50 games and being the breakout team, they need that Jalen Green from the end of last season to come through and play a full 82 games or however many he plays every night that he's out there. They need him in that form this season. I don't know if it's going to be quite like that, but the fact that it was a 20-game stretch and he was so dominant makes me optimistic that we will see a much better version of him, something closer to what we were expecting when he was drafted. When he went second overall, the conversation was future scoring champ, a guy that could average 30 points per game at some point in the league. I don't know if he'll ever get there, but Jalen Green showed those flashes last season, and he really is the key to the Rockets unlocking it sooner than later. If he never becomes that all-star, all-NBA caliber guard, that's fine. They have so many other avenues to add players of that type, but Jalen Green hitting would be such a massive success, and I'm still a believer that he can at least reach an all-star level, a guy that just shows way too many flashes for me to give up on him quite yet. So those two guys as part of their core is huge. And then there's a player like Jabari Smith Jr., who feels like he'll never be a top 2 player on a championship team, but as that connecting guy out there on the perimeter, as a lockdown defender, a three-point shooter who's developing a bit more of an on-ball game, he is a fantastic piece to have on this squad. I feel like as we look down the line, if the Rockets eventually reach championship contention with this core, Jabari Smith Jr. can be like that Andrew Wiggins for the Warriors or an Aaron Gordon for the Denver Nuggets. Not quite in the same mold as those two players, but that one glue connecting piece that every championship team needs. Like this past season was really solid from him. Almost 14 points per game, shot just under 37% from deep, 8 rebounds. The rebounding is big from Jabari Smith Jr. as well. That's what you want to see from your 4. The defense improved, and again, it was just his second season, and he is a very young player still. As the talent around him improves, he's one of those players that's going to rise a lot in terms of his own stock. So they keep getting more talent. It's only going to get better for Jabari Smith Jr., and he's a linchpin to that top 10 defense they had last season, as well as a guy like Thompson, who may have the most upside out of anybody on this roster. Fantastic rookie season, 9.5 points per game, shot over 53% from the field, and that was despite being a 13.8% three-point shooter. That does have to come along at least a little bit if he wants to be super effective in the league, but he's just such a dynamic athlete, one of the best athletes I've ever watched out there in any sport. It feels like he hovers when he jumps. The vision is there. He averaged 2.6 assists in pretty limited minutes, while not often being the on-ball playmaker. 6.6 rebounds, 1.3 steals. Feels like he has all defensive potential in him. As soon as this season, they just continue to find great defenders. The Rockets do. Like I mentioned, they signed Dillon Brooks, of course. Fred VanVleet competes on that end. This is a team that really wants to buy into that defensive identity, and Thompson can do that while also being a high-level playmaker. Eventually, when Fred VanVleet isn't on this roster, Thompson is going to seamlessly step into that starting guard role and just continue to evolve this roster. I'm a big believer in Thompson, and if there's any player on this Rockets roster right now that can eventually be the best player on a championship team, I think Amon might be that guy. He has crazy upside. Just watching him out there, it feels like I'm looking at a guy that a few years later we'll look at and say, okay, yeah, he was the most obvious star in the making ever. Not to mention they also picked up Sheppard in this year's draft, who a lot of people think could be the rookie of the year, could be the best player out of this class, and he was dynamic in summer league. Whether he was shooting the ball, he's one of the best collegiate shooters I've ever seen. He was playmaking, he was knocking down mid-range jumpers, attacking off the dribble, he competes defensively. Sheppard has fantastic upside, whether it's just a great role player, it's eventually a star player. It just feels like a guy that's going to contribute to winning, and that's a lot of players. When I take a look at this roster, like Tari, Eason, who they're getting back this season too. He didn't play a lot last year, yet is still a high-level defender. That's only going to contribute even more to their defensive upside. I think they could be a top 5 defensive team in the league this season, and Eason is a hustle guy. He's someone who just makes winning plays. They added Steven Adams, someone who can set big body screens, which is going to really open open up the game even more for a guy like Jalen Green, giving him someone who can just knock defenders off their path. Like, Adams was huge for what the Grizzlies did for years with their half-court offense, with getting Ja Morant wide open lanes to attack the basket. Imagine what Thompson and Jalen Green, guys like that, can do with those screens, assuming Adams is healthy, because that health has been a bit of a concern. Cam Whitmore had a great rookie season in limited minutes, was a bucket, and that's just kind of what he does. He gets buckets, which this team needs. They need more offense. That was the struggle point for them last season, and if he continues to evolve, Jalen Green continues to get buckets the way that he was, Sheppard contributes on that end, the offense can take a jump with the defense still being stout. This is just an incredibly talented team. They're really deep. They've got an amazing 1 through 10. They could even go down to 11 if you wanted to go that far. They've got a great coach in Ime Udoka. They've built this defensive, gritty culture. They made the run at the end of last season that I imagine will give them some momentum and some belief they can make it happen this year. They can be a playoff team. And all this culminates in a squad that if they ended up in the playoffs, despite it being a stacked Western Conference, I really would not be that surprised. I'm not sure if I'm going to bet it because, again, there are so many great teams. But this does feel like a squad that could take a jump, even if it isn't up to a top 2 or a 3 seed like, you know, the Thunder, the Grizzlies did, or the Magic. Even if they don't make that type of jump, if the Rockets end up in the playoffs, or even if they end up in the play-in, and I'm one of those teams that's also in that spot, I don't want to play the Houston Rockets. And once again, this is only the beginning. All the guys I've mentioned on this young core are like 23 or younger. This past season was their first year as a group. They're only going to find more cohesion. Not to mention, like I said earlier, they have the potential to make a massive splash in the trade market any moment now. If by the end of this season, the Rockets decide they're ready to go all in, or even around the deadline, they're liking where they're at, but a big-time player becomes available, they could cash in some chips. They could trade a couple of these young guys and still have amazing depth. They've got great draft picks, too. Like, they got Phoenix's pick in 2027, no protections. That's insanely valuable. They have a 2027 pick swap with Brooklyn, who is just starting their rebuild, so that's only a couple of years away. You get to that point, and that could be one of the top picks in the draft. They could have both those picks as top 10 selections in 2027 if they want to keep them or if they want to trade them. Teams are going to be very interested. They have all their own picks going forward. In 2029, they have Dallas and or Phoenix's pick as well, so that's another very interesting selection from both of those squads, because who knows what could happen in 5 years in 2029. They've got really interesting draft capital. They've got salary filler. They've got young players. They could build a godfather offer if a big-time player becomes available, and when they went ahead and swapped some of their Brooklyn selections for Phoenix ones this offseason, the immediate report was that they're eyeing like a Devin Booker or a Kevin Durant. If one of those guys becomes available sooner than later, if Phoenix decides to blow it up, they're going to be towards the front of the line. Because if I'm the Suns, what I want back are my own picks. If I'm going to blow this up, if I'm going to trade two of the best players in the world, or at least one of them in Durant or Booker, I want to get my selections and make sure I'm good to go for the draft forward as we head towards a rebuild. So the first team I'm going to call up is Houston. So Houston's got some leverage there. They've got themselves towards the front of the line. And even if it isn't one of those guys, any number of teams would be super interested in those picks, because maybe they could even then flip those picks later for a Devin Booker or a Kevin Durant if they become available on a different timeline. Houston has so many ways to maneuver this thing, whether they keep this young core, it grows together and gets them towards championship contention, whether it's cashing in for a big-time player, which honestly I think is the route they will eventually go. I think next time a superstar becomes available, Houston's one of the top contenders for that guy, and if it isn't that player, give it till the next one or two and they will eventually make that big-time splash. They've got such a great setup. They almost remind me a little bit of the Raptors back in 2019. Not quite the same thing, of course, because that was a squad that was towards the top of the Eastern Conference, and then they added Kawhi Leonard. But just in terms of having a great base where you could theoretically supplant a superstar right into that system, and boom, you're going to be one of the best teams in the entire NBA, especially if the young players grow and develop like I think they can this season. I am really excited about the Houston Rockets. They're building something terrifying, something special out there in Houston. It's been a joy to watch them rise up because it's more fun when Houston is good. I know Thunder and Rockets fans have a bit of a rivalry, so that's exciting as we head into this next era with OKC being one of the top contenders in the West and the Rockets trying to get back up to that point too. It's just a lot of fun. So yeah, shout out to the Houston Rockets, everything they've been doing. I'll admit I was wrong about the Dillon Brooks, Fred VanVleet signings. In the end, they do end up looking like good decisions, and we'll see where they go from here. Let me know down below in the comments where you think the Rockets end up in the standings this season. How many wins do you think they get? What superstars superstar could you see them trading for down the line? Like maybe Lauri Markkanen does eventually become available. Say the Sixers struggle this year and suddenly Joel Embiid is available. Could it be Booker? Could it be Kevin Durant? Like maybe the Bucks fall apart and the Dame thing doesn't work out. Is it a Giannis? I'm just throwing names out there. Of course, maybe none of those guys get traded, but a lot of names to keep an eye on. With the NBA, you never really know. So let me know down below in the comments who are some other names that you think could end up in Houston at some point, and who do you believe has the highest potential on this team? Is it Sengun? Is it Jalen Green? Is it Thompson? Is it somebody else that I didn't even mention? Are you a big Reed Sheppard believer, perhaps? Yeah, appreciate y'all watching. Go ahead and leave a like and subscribe if you did enjoy the video. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on future uploads. And also, one more thing to comment down below. Let me know which other teams and topics you want to see me break down throughout the offseason. We've got about 50-ish days until the beginning of the year. I think less than that now as I'm recording this. So we've got some time to kill. Excited to talk about some other topics as we get through that. And yeah, I think that's all I've got. Appreciate you watching. Once again, I will see you all later. Real one, say it back.